The heat pressed down on the forward operating base like a hammer, baking the earth into cracked clay and filling the air with the smell of dust and diesel. A cluster of young privates stood near the perimeter wall, their rifles slung loosely as they shifted uncomfortably in the sun. At their center, Lieutenant Ryan Keller, freshly commissioned, starched and brimming with untested confidence, decided to make an example of the woman crouched at the base of the barrier. Honestly, Sergeant Keller said, his voice sharp and mocking, "Do you ever do anything useful, or is stacking sandbags your only certified skill set?" His smirk invited the privates' laughter, and they gave it nervously. Not because the joke was funny, but because they knew better than to be caught on the wrong side of a lieutenant's scorn. The target of his ridicule, Sergeant Dana Brooks, did not look up. She didn't defend herself. She didn't flinch. She simply continued her work, untying a sun-rotted sack, emptying its useless grit, refilling it with fresh earth, and nodding it off with calm precision. Every movement was deliberate, efficient, almost ritualistic. Her silence only fed Keller's arrogance. "Come on, Sergeant," he pressed, taking a step closer so his shadow stretched across her faded uniform. "We've got real soldiers here preparing for drills, and you're, what, playing Mason with the dirt? Maybe we can find you a nice desk somewhere if this is the best you've got." He glanced back at his audience, pleased to see them chuckle again, eager to mirror his disdain. To the untrained eye, Sergeant Brooks looked like nothing special, an older NCO with tired eyes and a quiet demeanor, working the least glamorous task on the fob. To Keller and his privates, her silence meant submission, her patience meant weakness. But just beyond them, on the veranda of the command post, General Marcus Vance paused his inspection. His gaze fixed not on Keller but on Brooks. What he saw was something the lieutenant couldn't recognize, the way her eyes flicked instinctively to the ridgeline between each bag, the way her breathing stayed measured in the oppressive heat, the subtle readiness in the way she carried herself. Vance had seen that posture before in combat among people whose lives depended on precision and control. It wasn't the stance of a tired logistician. It was the coiled stillness of someone trained for something far greater than filling sandbags. The scene on the perimeter looked simple, even humiliating: a loud young officer asserting dominance and a quiet sergeant refusing to rise to the bait. Yet beneath the surface, an entirely different story was unfolding, one that would within minutes reveal that appearances can lie, arrogance can blind, and silence can hide a depth of mastery more dangerous than anyone imagined. The laughter had barely faded when the world split open with a sound no soldier ever forgets. A sharp, flat crack followed instantly by the whip of a high-velocity round tearing past Lieutenant Ryan Keller's head. Dust and concrete chips exploded from the wall inches from his temple. For a split second, there was silence, that stunned heartbeat before panic takes hold. Then chaos erupted. The young privates scattered in all directions, their training dissolved in the raw terror of unexpected contact. Boots scraped against gravel as helmets clanged and weapons clattered. Some dove behind vehicles, others crouched low in the dirt, their eyes wide-eyed and unfocused. The air, heavy a moment before with arrogance and mockery, was now charged with the primal energy of fear. Keller dropped instinctively, his face pale, his earlier smirk obliterated by the reality of death's near miss. He fumbled for his radio, shouting commands in a voice that cracked with panic. "Sniper, get down. Find cover. Get the perimeter locked." His words were loud, frantic, colliding with one another in a desperate attempt to assert control, but control had already slipped through his fingers. Amid the chaos, one figure remained unmoved. Sergeant Dana Brooks rose from her knees in a single fluid motion, dust clinging to her faded uniform. She did not flinch. She did not scramble. Her eyes, steady and focused, were already scanning the ridgeline. She moved with the calm precision of someone who had faced this storm before, someone who understood that survival depended not on shouting, but on seeing. While Keller barked orders at men too rattled to listen, Brooks was already 3 steps ahead. Her gaze cut across the rocky landscape, dissecting angles, noting shadows, calculating distances with a speed and clarity honed over years of practice. Where others saw confusion, she saw patterns. The distant shimmer of heat off a ridge, the unnatural shape against stone, the telltale glint of glass catching sunlight. These were the details she absorbed in silence. Nearby, one of the privates clutched his sniper rifle like a lifeline, frozen in fear, his knuckles white against the stock. Brooks moved toward him with unhurried certainty, her presence calm in the maelstrom. "Let me see the rifle," she said, her voice steady, almost soothing. The young soldier's hands trembled. As he surrendered it, his wide eyes searching hers for assurance. What he found there was not fear, but absolute composure. Keller, still on his radio, screamed for overwatch, for counter-sniper support, for anything that might restore his authority. But his voice was lost in the storm of panic. The base was reacting to the past, the shot already fired. Brooks was preparing for the future, the next one. She settled the stock into her shoulder, her stance rooted, her breathing even. From the command post veranda, General Marcus Vance watched with the same quiet intensity as Brooks herself. He had seen this before, though not in years, the posture of a professional whose calm was forged in the crucible of combat. The general said nothing. He simply observed, knowing that in moments like these, truth revealed itself without words. For the young privates cowering behind sandbags, the world seemed to be unraveling. But for Sergeant Dana Brooks, it was falling into perfect alignment. Where Keller's arrogance had dissolved into fear, her silence had transformed into mastery. She was no longer the quiet sergeant mocked for stacking sandbags. She was something else entirely, something none of them yet understood. And as she raised her eyes to the scope, the chaos of the base seemed to narrow into a single line of focus, the unseen enemy on the ridgeline who had just made the mistake of believing she was irrelevant. The rifle felt almost foreign in the trembling hands of the young private, but when Sergeant Dana Brooks took it, the transformation was immediate. Her grip was not hesitant or uncertain. It was intimate, practiced, as though the weapon itself recognized the steadiness of her touch. She checked the bolt, slid it forward with a crisp motion, adjusted the scope with two precise clicks, and settled the rifle into her shoulder in one seamless flow. To the untrained eye, it was a simple transfer of arms. To anyone who had lived through combat, it was unmistakable mastery. Around her, the perimeter was still in chaos. Lieutenant Ryan Keller barked into his radio, his voice climbing higher with every order that went unanswered. Young privates crouched low, their eyes wide, some gripping their rifles like lifelines, others fumbling for cover behind half-built barriers. The atmosphere reeked of panic, but Brooks was untouched by it. Her breathing was steady, her posture relaxed, and her eyes, now behind the scope, narrowed, not with tension but with clarity. She did not see just a ridgeline. She saw air currents lifting heat in shimmering waves. She saw the angle of the afternoon sun bouncing off glass. She saw a faint distortion in the rock, a shape that did not belong. While the others reacted to the fear of what had already happened, Brooks anticipated what would come next. Her mind, sharpened by years of experience, reduced the chaos to mathematics, distance, elevation, windage, and timing. The private beside her whispered hoarsely, "Ma'am, that's over 1,000 meters." His voice cracked disbelief thick in his words. Brooks did not answer. She simply adjusted her cheek against the stock, the world narrowing into the perfect circle of the optic. For a long, breathless second, the perimeter held still. Even Keller's shouting seemed to fade into the background. All eyes, whether they realized it or not, had shifted toward Brooks. Her silence carried its own gravity, pulling the fractured energy of the moment into focus. Then she exhaled. It was a slow, deliberate release of air, steadying her body, quieting her pulse. Her finger tightened on the trigger, not in a jerk, but with a calm inevitability. A motion rehearsed thousands of times in training and in battlefields few of these soldiers would ever know. The rifle gave a single sharp report, a controlled cough swallowed by the desert air. A heartbeat later, across the valley, a faint puff of dust rose from the ridgeline. The shape that had lurked there slumped motionless, disappearing into the stone it had tried to hide within. There was no second shot. There didn't need to be. Silence swept over the base, deeper and heavier than before. The privates froze, their eyes flicking from the distant ridge back to Brooks. The young soldier who had handed her his rifle stared at her as though he were seeing something supernatural. Even Keller crouched low with his radio stopped, mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. Brooks lowered the rifle with the same calm precision she had used to fire it. She checked the chamber, handed it back to the private, and gave him a small, firm nod. "It works fine," she said quietly, her voice carrying more weight than all of Keller's frantic shouting combined. From the command post veranda, General Marcus Vance finally let out the breath he had been holding. He had seen many things in his decades of service, panic bravery, arrogance, and sacrifice. But what he had just witnessed was something rarer. It was the unmistakable mark of a professional who didn't need rank or recognition to prove their worth. The base had just been reminded of a lesson older than war itself: true, mastery does not announce itself with noise. It reveals itself in silence, in a single impossible act carried out with flawless precision. And that day, Sergeant Dana Brooks had revealed far more than anyone was prepared to understand. The rifle shots still echoed faintly across the valley when the weight of silence settled over the entire base. Soldiers remained crouched behind barriers, their hands still tight on weapons, their eyes darting between the distant ridge and the quiet figure who had brought the threat to an end with one impossible round. Sergeant Dana Brooks stood with the same calm as before. Her boots dusted, her hands steady, as if firing at a sniper over 1,000 meters away were no more than tightening the knot on a sandbag. She had already turned back toward the wall when the sound of measured footsteps broke the stillness. General Marcus Vance descended from the command post veranda, his stride deliberate, his expression carved in stone. He ignored Lieutenant Ryan Keller, who still crouched with his radio pressed uselessly to his chest, his pale face betraying the collapse of all confidence. The general's eyes were fixed only on Brooks, and with each step closer, the air thickened, the anticipation pressing down on everyone who watched. Brooks herself did not straighten or seek acknowledgement. She simply resumed tying off another sandbag, her posture calm, her movements unchanged. But as her sleeve shifted, the faint outline of a patch, faded nearly invisible, caught the sunlight. General Vance saw it instantly, and his eyes narrowed with recognition. He stopped just feet away, and in a voice low but resonant enough for the entire perimeter to hear, he spoke. "Lieutenant Keller, do you see that patch?" His hand gestured toward the small, weathered circle embroidered with a barely discernible flower, its silhouette stark and understated. Keller stammered, unable to form words. "That," Vance continued, his tone sharpened by decades of command, "is the insignia of Nightshade. Most of you have never heard the name, and if you had, you'd dismiss it as a myth. A ghost story told in classrooms, a whispered legend in briefing rooms. But I assure you, Nightshade is real. It is a unit that does not exist on paper, has no official roster, no budget line. It does not recruit, it selects. Their mission: advanced counterinsurgency, long-range threat elimination, the jobs deemed impossible, even for our most elite Marines and Special Forces." The words fell over the young privates like a hammer. Some glanced at Brooks in disbelief, others in awe. Their earlier smirks burned away as quickly as morning fog in desert heat. Vance let the silence linger before continuing. "The average Nightshade operator carries more confirmed long-range engagements than most battalions. They work in the shadows without recognition, and their names, if they survive, are etched not on plaques, but in the lives they saved." He turned fully toward Brooks, now his stern expression softening just slightly, his voice lowering to something almost reverent. "Sergeant Dana Brooks isn't just stacking sandbags. She is one of them. She has walked battlefields you can't even imagine, faced enemies you'll never read about in your history books. That shot you just witnessed, it wasn't luck. It was a glimpse of mastery most soldiers never get to see in their entire careers." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then General Vance drew himself to his full height, heels clicking together, and rendered a slow, deliberate salute. The gesture was not casual nor perfunctory, it was heavy with meaning. A salute not from rank to rank, but from one warrior to another. "Sergeant Brooks," he said firmly, "your work here is done. It is an honor to have you on this line." Every Marine present felt the gravity of the moment. The general of the base had saluted an enlisted sergeant, a woman mocked minutes earlier, as irrelevant, now revealed as a living legend. Lieutenant Keller's face drained of all color as realization crashed into him. The young privates, once complicit in the laughter, now looked at Brooks with wide-eyed reverence. But Brooks, true to form, did not bask in the recognition. She offered a crisp nod, acknowledged the salute with steady composure, and turned back to her task. She tightened the knot on another sandbag, placed it perfectly, and moved on as if nothing had changed. Yet for everyone watching, everything had. The next morning, Lieutenant Ryan Keller found himself walking toward the motor pool, his steps slow and uncertain. He had spent a sleepless night replaying the moment, a single shot fired with impossible calm, a general salute delivered with reverence, and the crushing weight of his own arrogance exposed before the entire unit. When he finally reached Sergeant Dana Brooks, she was where she always seemed to be, working quietly, methodically. This time, she was repairing a loose bracket on a Humvee, her hands steady, her focus absolute. Keller cleared his throat, his voice stripped of its usual swagger. "Sergeant Brooks," he began, "there is no excuse for what I said yesterday. I was arrogant. I was wrong. And I am sorry." The words hung in the air, heavier than any shouted command. Brooks didn't respond immediately. She finished tightening the bracket, wiped her hands on a rag, and then turned to face him. Her expression held no trace of anger, only that calm, unshakable composure that defined her. She gave a single nod. "Learn from it, Lieutenant. Assumptions are a liability. Focus on the work." It was not a lecture. It was not a rebuke. It was a lesson offered in the quiet language of professionals. Keller felt the weight of it more deeply than any reprimand he had ever received. From that day on, he carried himself differently, less with noise and more with purpose. And over time, the base itself began to change. The wall where Brooks had stacked sandbags was christened Brooks's Line, a name spoken with quiet respect. Her story spread not as gossip, but as parable, a reminder that true mastery doesn't announce itself. It proves itself in silence. And that's a lesson worth carrying beyond the battlefield. If you believe real strength lies in humility and action, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories of unknown heroes whose quiet competence reshaped the world around them.